It's a real privilege to be introducing this next session, and I think the numbers that have come in here to hear this is a reflection of how desperately we need to hear these voices, because the kind of voices we're going to talk about are voices who have been silenced. People don't want to know about it because these are uncomfortable truths, but I think you would all agree with us that these voices must be heard because they carry the hope for the future. And they also, I think, are the voices that will bring this whole thing down, because these are the people who have been lied to and damaged and so on. So with the greatest of pleasure, I'm going to introduce James Esses and Richie Herron.
It's an absolute privilege to be here talking to Ritchie and going to hear a bit more about his story and hopefully have about 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A from the audience, so please do think about any comments or questions that you've got. Ritchie, I've known your story for quite some time. We first spoke in April of this year, and I'm also generally immersed in this field on a daily basis. And yet, every time that I hear your story again, I find myself moved, sometimes to the point of tears, for the way in which that you've suffered. And following that, I often find myself feeling extremely angry as well about what has happened to you and what you've been put through. So I thought it might be a good idea for you to just start in your own words and give a brief overview to the audience of kind of your journey and what's led you to being here in front of us all today.
Thank you very much, James, for those kind words. Hello, everyone. It's so great to see you all here. There's so many smiling, happy faces. I set off on a medical course for transition when I turned 26 years old. Born male, I was always male. I never became female, as the lies they told us would guarantee that I would, even after I had surgery when I was 30. And I wasn't a child when I transitioned. I was an adult, but I was a vulnerable adult, and we are part of the conversation that gets missed out, and we need to be included, because just because somebody turns 18 doesn't mean that they're mystically better and they're able to make all the right rational decisions. I had severe mental health issues, and I was upfront about them, because when I went into the gender clinic, unlike my peers who all told each other to lie about their gender dysphoria, I thought this would fix me. I thought, this is the answer, this is the solution, so I'm going to tell them everything, and I did. I told them absolutely everything, and they paid me back with betrayal in the highest degree. And I'm not angry anymore. I've done that. I'm assertive and confident because I know we're in the end game now.
I saw on Twitter a few weeks ago that you posted a letter from your former psychiatrist, and I just wanted to read out a couple of quotes from that and get your views on this now. So your former psychiatrist starts off with the words, unfortunately, and goes on to say that you have a, quote, negative view of surgery from others, that you need to, quote, look at the big picture, that you are, quote, an excellent candidate for surgery, and then finally the psychiatrist says, quote, I'm sure it will make her feel better about herself. And I just want to know, in the time that's passed and with everything that you've been through, what's it like to reflect back on those words from that psychiatrist?
I feel I want answers, because I want to know what an ideal candidate of gender reassignment surgery was. At that point, I was only a few months on hormones. I was barely established, and I was barely in the role, and I want to know what that actually means. And what a lot of people don't seem to understand is this wasn't a case where I had the surgery and regretted it. I was getting hounded. From the second I got in the gender clinic, do you want genital reassignment surgery? Do you want genital reassignment surgery? And I said no, time and time again, because I was sure I didn't want it. And at this point, I was also getting gender therapy sessions too with a gender therapist at the gender clinic. And all me doubts, everything that I was sort of feeling was all allocated to internalized transphobia. And you've got to understand how powerful it is for not just your community, but medical professionals to tell you not only you should do this, but you are the ideal candidate. This will make you better, this will fix you. And to tell that to somebody who's vulnerable, who's got substance misuse issues, who's got severe OCD and other issues going on, I feel like that is incredibly irresponsible. And it's like, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about speaking out is, again, this can happen to adults. It's criminal, it happens to children, but it happens to adults too. We can't just stop at 18 and be like, they're 18, they can do what they like. No, we need to do better for adults too.
I couldn't agree more with that, and it appears that so much of the mental health profession and the individuals that you had the misfortune of encountering have thrown some of the core tenets of what mental health and psychotherapeutic support is meant to be. You know, the Hippocratic Oath says to do no harm, and these people have inflicted harm, and for that I don't think they can ever be forgiven. Can you share a bit about the difficulties that you still face in an ongoing way today off the back of the surgery and what you went through? Because I think it's important that people hear this.
Yeah, so when we say surgery, that's a very polite term. When you say stuff like bottom surgery, it's a very diluted term. But what it was is I had a penile inversion with scrotal graft. So they removed me testicles, they inverted me penis, they drilled a hole in me pelvis, they moved me prostate forward, and I nearly bled to death in the surgery. I came back because I lost an extreme amount of blood, an unhealthy amount of blood. They didn't give us a blood transfusion until like 5 days after. They were just waiting to see if I would be all right. I had umpteen infections, and I left hospital with a constricted urethra. So in the surgery, they kind of changed the angle of the urethral passage, so your waterworks. And the way they did it, they kind of constricted it. Like if you imagine a straw getting bent, that's kind of what my urethra is like. So what it meant was for the first 6 months or so, pain was impossibly hard and the worst agony I've ever felt in my life. So I had 2 revision surgeries, one local when I was awake, and the next one with general anesthetic about 6-7 months later. But these issues have left me with incontinence. They've left me with pain. And I mean, the sort of, like, I don't have any nerves down there that pick anything up but pain. It's like I'm being tortured every bloody time, you know? I've got to dilate to keep that open, and that hurts. And that feels like I'm being punished every so many weeks, and you can't just let it close up. You get horrific infections, you create a pocket, and scientists are finding new types of bacteria in these wounds too, and it's just like, it's catastrophic, and it kills your confidence. I'm just now in the stage of, whatever, I'm just gonna go for it. And I use male changing rooms, whatever. I wanna go swimming, whatever. It is what it is, it's done now. But I'm never going to be the same ever again. There is no reversal to this as well. Don't let anyone tell you this can be reversed. It cannot be reversed. You don't, even if you've had if you're a female and you've had a mastectomy, and they say, oh, you can just get your breast augmentation. You will not get your breasts back, you know? It's an absolute travesty what they're selling to people. And, you know, I feel words like mutilation should be reserved for detransitioners, but all we've got now is a degree of refined mutilation, and it's, you know, it's no more refined than an amputation is, right? Because that's what essentially it is. And then obviously you've got all the psychological stuff. Every time I'm changing my clothes, every time I go to the toilet, every time I have a shower, the reminder's there. No matter how good my day is, it's ruined every time.
You know, to listen to that, And then to see some of the material that's put out by groups like Mermaids and Stonewall and Pink News, who are basically glorifying this stuff. I mean, I saw that Snapchat and Pink News entered into a partnership together. It was an initiative called Pure Trans Joy. And they're posting photographs of young girls with mastectomy scars saying euphoria. And I've come across a writer from Pink News equating irreversible transitioning surgery with, in her words, a new blonde who regrets having their hair dyed. And I've even seen people say that it's not a big deal to have a double mastectomy because if you change your mind, you can always have breast implants again. So this is the type of thing that we're up against. It's the complete glorification of it. And then you hear what you've been through and what you're still struggling with today. It's disgraceful. It's disgusting.
It's criminal. That's what it is.
I want to talk a bit about this point around contagion and the way in which this ideology has swept through people, particularly young people. We're told that we must celebrate young people who come out as trans. Mermaids recently said on their podcast that young people coming out as trans can make the world a better place. Now, I know from your story that you were involved in various kind of online communities around the time that you were going through all of this. I mean, what was your experience of these communities, the type of individuals that were on there, and the type of things that you were basically being fed?
Yeah, so you've got people who have been dealing with their own issues for many decades, and without going too much into what I would call my theory on it, is you've got these people who are highly sexually fueled, and they look at young males as a target within themselves, but also, and they really, really want us to transition. They really want to see pictures. They love it when a young male's feminized. And it was kind of, there was a lot of encouragement, but when you got to keep in mind, by the time I got to that point, my self-esteem was shot from a lifetime of issues, and I had mental health issues, as I mentioned before. And I go into this space, no one's ever told us these things, and all of a sudden, I'm just like a god and a goddess in a way to them. And they're telling me how great I look and how, and it feeds like that self-esteem that you never got, it feeds part of the ego, because there is a bit of ego in this too. And I don't think these individuals were all bad. I think there was a lot of, just people who were very similar to me in a sense. But there were certainly individuals who took advantage, and they took advantage in person, not just with me, but other young transitioners too. And that's an epidemic. There is an epidemic going on with young people online too, with the situation of grooming. And by grooming, I'm talking about the under 18s who are, they send hormones in the post, and what a lot of people don't realize, when somebody's sending HRT to a child, there's this inherent trust that gets built. And what happens is that the person sending it is expecting progress updates in the form of photos. And the amount of young males especially who have been through this pipeline of sharing all these intimate photos with these men who are much, much older. And unfortunately, it's not middle-aged women, it's middle-aged men who are doing this. Not all to meet a, what's the word? I don't want to say that they're all exactly the same, but there is definitely an interest in the older versus the younger males from that perspective.
I think one of the things that terrifies me the most is that you obviously made these decisions in transition when you were an adult. And I think everybody in the audience today would agree that you come across as both an articulate and highly intelligent person. And if you can get caught up in this and suffer irreversible harm as a result of it, what hope is there for vulnerable children?
It's not about intelligence, it's about emotion. It's about, you can't, When you argue with somebody who's trans, like if you were to argue with me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have intellectualized all manners of things to either make you out to be a bigot or me to be right in a way that hadn't quite worked out. But either way, I was always right, you were always wrong. That was the setup when I was trans, right? Sorry, I've just totally lost my train of thought.
No, look, I think that's a fair point, because case in point, intelligence, articulation isn't enough to avoid being caught up in this.
Yep.
But if adults can get caught up in this with all of the life experience they have, I mean, what on earth do we do about the children? We find ourselves in the most bizarre situation in which a child can't go to the local corner store and buy a bloody scratch card, but can consent to irreversible medicalisation. I mean,
they're not consenting; it's the parents who are consenting.
For you, looking at your own experience and what's ended up happening to you, where does the responsibility lie ultimately?
I mean, I do have my own responsibility to take on it, and I think my responsibility lies in raising the alarm. Not to say, oh, this is my fault, but trans is great, and gender affirmation surgery is beautiful, and I'm not going to let my experience impact. No, I'm going to say, we've got problems. We've got major problems. People are slipping through the net. People are taking their own lives and then being martyred for it. But it's mainly regret that is causing the vast... I mean, if trans was so great and so beautiful, we would have no TIDO, we would have no Trans Day Remembrance. But people are having these surgeries, realizing that they've been totally oversold, or it's something just hasn't been talked about it. And then they regret it, and then they tell others they regret it, and they're like, well, you should have done your research. You should have done this. You should have went to the right surgeon. And no one is allowed to experience any regret if it goes wrong. But if it goes right, you're perfect candidate for their PR or whatever it is. So personal responsibility, I think my responsibility is to say, yeah, I made a huge mistake for me. But that doesn't mean that I should go and sit in the corner and be blamed for it by everyone else. What about the people who enabled that? What about the policymakers? What about the doctors? What about the psychiatrists? And as I keep saying time and time again, I wasn't writing the assessments and I wasn't holding the scalpel. That's where my responsibility lies.
Yeah, I get that, because whilst you may have made a decision, you should never have been allowed to make that decision in the first place. And, you know, we come back to the idea of therapy. We've spoken about the Hippocratic Oath already. You know, gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. There is no getting away from this. And we hear on the other side of the argument, don't pathologise being trans. And yet, in the same breath, they say, but please make irreversible medication and surgery available to us. And now we know that there's a push towards affirmative therapy. And this is the only mental health condition which is treated by affirmation. What do you think the answer is with therapy? Do you believe that therapy should be mandatory before somebody is entitled to medically transition?
I think therapy, for a start, the therapy field needs to be tightly regulated because we've got zero regulation in here in the US. So you have people who do a few courses, get very minimal qualifications, and all of a sudden the gender therapists, and people wonder how we get here. How hard of a job is it for somebody to come up to you and say, I think I'm trans, and your job is not to say anything but yes? How hard is that? That's not hard. Anyone can do that, surely. The hard work is to be critical, but also polite. I don't believe that therapy is the bee's answers to absolutely everything. I think we need a holistic view of all the comorbidities that bring people to transitions. So did you have a lot of homophobia as a child? Maybe you need to see a therapist about that. Did you have bullying, PTSD, anxiety, depression? Of course you did. You know, and it's like all these issues it's not just a therapist that can magically fix you and approve you or whatever. I don't think this can be taken lightly with even a year or two. I don't know what the solution is. All I know is what we have doesn't work. So it doesn't make sense for me to reuse the same system we had before in reverse for detransitioners or are going through gender affirmation? Could it be the system itself doesn't work, and we need to knock it all down, which is happening, and to rebuild it from scratch with a holistic approach that takes in all these issues, and we don't just rely on that blanket, you need 6 months, 1 month, 1 year therapy before. I might not need it, but someone else might need it. You know, they might need more intense therapy than me or another person. So I don't think you can just apply a bog standard rule to this. You need to view it as an individual issue too.
I completely agree. You know, one of the core principles of therapy is to not go into the therapy room with a predetermined outcome, and that's what's happening time and time again. And I also note that the dysphoria is being treated as the thing itself, as opposed to a symptom of wider disease. And you've spoken about some of the comorbidities that exist there as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that really pissed me off, and apologies for swearing, I've done well, actually. So one of the things that really, really made me drive out of that feeling of I'm less regretful and more angry was after surgery, because I was seeing a gender therapist at the gender clinic, about 3 months after surgery, when I was well enough to go to the gender clinic, I went to the therapist and I was like, I think I've made a huge mistake here. And he was like, no, you haven't. I was like, next week, I think I've made a huge mistake. No, you haven't. Why? Because you've got obsessive compulsive disorder and you've had a lot of anesthetic. Anesthetic lowers your serotonin, therefore your regret is actually just a symptom of your OCD. But before, it wasn't, me trans couldn't have been allocated to OCD. So it was very selective, and that really pissed me off because they knew when I came in, I was highly, highly obsessive. I had a diagnosis, medicated, the whole thing. And then when they would just say, you're just a trans person with OCD. They're not related. But when I had regret, then I was allowed to have the OCD thing as a reason for it. It couldn't just be that I actually regretted doing this horrific thing to myself. And I mean, every man in the room, and probably women too, would recoil at the idea of waking up with nothing down below, you know?
I think that anecdote demonstrates how ideology has taken over this profession, because you can walk into a therapy room and say, I'm trapped in the wrong body, and the therapist will say, yes, you are. And then you can walk in a few years down the line and say, I made a big mistake, and they say, no, you didn't.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Given the setting today, I thought it might be helpful to talk a bit about the correlation between sexuality and gender identity. We know that these two things are becoming conflated. I mean, the government originally, with its conversion therapy ban, wanted to ban it for both sexual orientation and gender identity. We know the statistics of those who present as trans who later come out as gay. What's your personal experience of this, and particularly, what are your thoughts around this notion of internalised homophobia?
Well, with internalized homophobia, you can look at that from a structural sense and see how somebody could feel that way. But in terms of is gender and sex the same thing? Sexuality and gender identity, they are always treated as separate, isolated things, but that's one of the biggest lies. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but trans people are extremely highly sexually fueled, and it shows. I don't believe that there is nothing to do with sexuality. One of the reasons why I transitioned was because I didn't want to be a gay man. I said to the therapist, you know, I could never imagine myself as a man with a man, but I could imagine myself as a woman with a man. And she went, yeah, that must be because you're trans. Not because I hated myself because I was gay. Not because I had horrific homophobia in school, growing up in my family in the northeast of England, which isn't exactly, you know, there's a reason Brighton's down south, and
yeah. I saw Keir Starmer the other day. Sorry, Sir Keir Starmer. fair reaction. I saw that he was making a keynote speech at the Pink News Awards the other day. Obviously a very civilized affair where journalistic integrity is at the heart of what they do. But he said that if the Labour Party get into government, they want an outright ban on conversion therapy. That includes gender identity. But the sick irony in all of this is that the current system actually enables a form of conversion therapy, and it is gay conversion therapy, turning people who are actually gay straight. Ritchie, what do you think about the idea of gender non-conformity? Because, it felt for a while that we were moving away from aggressive stereotypes, and now we've gone right back there again. I've come across statements on Twitter of trans women describing how they first knew that they were a woman, or what embodies womanhood for them. And the examples include wearing earrings, studying an arts degree, and I'm not joking with this one. This is word for word what it said: dressing up as a sexy kitten. So, what do you think? What do you think has gone on here? Because are we just regressing back to these dangerous, harmful stereotypes all over again?
Yeah, what happened? The 80s were great. We had it right in the 80s, and in the 90s. A certain Sheffield politician who was running or trying to be a politician had it right, just saying that these aren't women's or men's clothes, these are my clothes, and that makes sense. But gender non-conformity, it makes sense when you have somebody who is trying to reject the sex stereotypes, or maybe they're same-sex attracted, and they look out in the world and they see what attracts that sex, and naturally it's going to be behaviors from the opposite sex, so they take that on. That's all, to me, what a lot of gender non-conformity has a lie-in with sexuality, and I do believe that. In terms of those reasons, I don't know about them, to be honest. I think anyone should be allowed to wear earrings. I don't think it's a good idea to sex clothes, but gender non-conformity, sorry, I'm just rambling. But, yeah.
No, you're not rambling at all, and I think I completely agree with you that people should be entitled to study whatever degree they want and dress how they want and speak how they want, and that's good, and it doesn't change your sex. It doesn't matter how much you play up to a stereotype of what the other sex is.
Unless you're trying to be a kitty.
A word on mermaids. We've had now significant safeguarding concerns being raised. A lot of this has been well known for periods of time. It's only now that politicians and the media are starting to take up on this. Breast binders being sent behind parents' backs, podcasts pushing alienation from families and misinformation, fast-tracking young people towards gender GP. What should happen to mermaids and those individuals who are affiliated with them?
You all know the answer to that, don't you?
What about education? Because this seems to be one of the biggest shifts over recent years, and the type of materials that children are being presented with. I'm coming across more and more primary school materials telling children that the doctor took a guess at their sex and might have made a mistake. And we have the literal rewriting of history. I've seen history books suggesting that Joan of Arc was trans. What do you think we should do? What can be done about the ideology that seems to have infected education?
Let's be clear that it is cruel to tell a child about go through puberty that feeling uncomfortable with your body means that you're the other sex. That is cruel, because every child will feel uncomfortable. I'm not an education expert, and there are probably people much better suited to answer this, but I think just any ideology in the schools, as Julie was saying earlier, any ideology anywhere is going to infect ideas for what people think is a good benefit, but it's actually very harmful, and we don't realize till after the fact. So I predict a very drastic turn over the next couple of years with how this is approached in schools. and I hope they just dial it back to about 2 or 3% from what it's at, because some of it is helpful, I'm sure, but all of it, like some of these messages are just downright evil as well.
Agreed, and it's causing a lot of confusion for young people. I spoke to a mother recently whose daughter came home from school and was telling her about all this gender ideology that she'd been learning, and the mother sitting down trying to basically explain to her what is true and what isn't true. And the daughter said, very earnestly and very innocently, but if my teacher says it, it must be right. And this is the type of confusion, this kind of, I'd call it mental torture that we're inflicting on these young people who do not know who or what to trust anymore.
I mean, it'd just been me, but I was never listening to my teachers like that, you know what I mean? What's going on? I don't understand. Never mind.
A word on what it's like to be a detransitioner. I mean, we're obsessed in this society with labeling things. In some ways it's helpful, in other ways it's not. Have you found any struggles in particular with now being and representing detransitioners?
No, just nutters occasionally in my DMs, but whatever. I personally feel like when it comes to detransition, we can't just sell people the idea that you can go back. You can just take new hormones and a new set of surgeries to reverse what you had before. That is not going to happen. Get that idea out your head. This all goes down to the idea of estrogen equals women, testosterone equals men. So to be a man, you need to go on full testosterone, no matter what you've done to your body. To be a full woman, you need to take full estrogen, no matter what's happening to your body. But the reality is, it's not that simple. Men and women both have testosterone and estrogen. And the lie that we get sold as detransition means that you take a certain set of procedures to go back. There is no going back. Detransition is disengaging from the mindset that you can change your sex, and that's fundamentally it. You can't change your sex. That's the spoiler here. That's it, basically. That's what detransition is. And in terms of people, I'm not really bothered if somebody comes at me with fit or all. I'm like, I've been on the internet for 25 years because I'm a very well-dedicated nerd. And I've said worse things than they've said to me, so I'm just like, it really doesn't faze us, because I think what I realized as well is I don't respect their opinions. If you come at me with something, I'll be like, why is James saying this? I respect this person. Why is Julie Bindle coming at me with this? I respect this person. Why is Sinead telling us something? I respect this person. That's the opinions that should matter, the people that you respect, not people you don't know, not randoms. Who cares?
Let's. I mean, linking into that is kind of free speech, cancel culture, injustice. Obviously, you and I have both had experiences. We're both involved in litigation of one sort or another. And there is something about putting your face and your name out there for all and sundry to see. And I recall that when we first spoke, at that point, you were still anonymous. You were speaking out, but from an anonymous platform. What was it ultimately that you think gave you the strength and the push to waive that anonymity and come out and reveal yourself to the rest of the world?
You guys. Thank you. No, really, really thank you so much for that. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be here. Full stop.
Regrets is often something that I'm asked about. Do you regret putting yourself out there? Do you regret going public?
No, I regret a bad Chinese food takeaway thing or an Indian. That's something you can regret. Like, regret is a word that should be used for not like this. This isn't regret. This is more than regret. This is grief. This is anger. This is betrayal. This isn't just regret. Regret puts the onus on the individual, either in the phase when they're extremely vulnerable. So to take full responsibility and to be fully regretful, you have to be in the mindset that you were in full control from start to finish, and it's just not the reality. It really isn't. And I don't think regret is a helpful term. I think we need to use words like grief and betrayal, because that's what it is. You know, people have got immense grief for the life that they're never going to have. They feel betrayal from the parents or the community or all these things coming at them. And then when they do detransition and come out, they get told it's your fault, you should have done the research, you're stupid, or they'll mock you to any nth degree. And it's just like, it's a total polar opposite from the community that they try and say that they are, you know. So I think regret is a branding issue that has happened from the trans side to put the onus of responsibility on the individual rather than the movement, the medical professionals, the psychiatrists. You know, people think that when you sign a consent form, it's there to protect the doctor. It's not. It's there to protect the patient. So yeah, that's what I think on regret.
I think that's a very good way to look at it. And you know, you and I have been through vastly different experiences, but I would imagine the hope for both of us is that some good somewhere can come out of it. Although, to be fair, I do have one regret, which is ever trusting a Daily Mail photographer when they said that it would look cool to pose against a tree.
I've had a similar experience. I literally looked like a lost child in the forest in these photos.
I just want to think very finally about the kind of future, because it does feel more and more as if the tide is turning. I'm reflecting since I was here last year, and I kind of use this conference as a benchmark for where we're going, and things have undoubtedly changed. We've had legal victories in the form of Maya Forstater and Alison Bailey. We've seen positive media coverage. We've got the interim CAS report. We've got the closure of the Tavistock, and hopefully mermaids will soon be obliterated. What gives you hope for the future?
All those things you just said.
All right, thanks, Ritchie. I think we've got about 10 minutes or so for some Q&As, so I think we should have some roving microphones. So does anyone have... Another one, just...
This is my microphone.
Okay, yes, if you could put your hands up and then I'll try and come to as many people as possible. This gentleman in the front row.
Just remind them.
Hi, I'm interested in what tends to be discovered when, if and when, exploratory healthcare occurs, which I know is, I know what they call it, because I've seen it, speculated that it can be linked with childhood abuse or broken homes. I mean, in my own experience as a child, I mean, my dad was away a lot. I had an amazing mother, an older sister I worshipped. But are there, and have there been any studies? I've looked online for this and can't find anything. Have there been any studies on what the trends tend to be? Is there any data statistics, and or is it just being so repressed that there's no hope? And if you feel like speaking, Ritchie, about where your dysphoria came from, then please do, but it might be personal.
Thank you. So I've never, I know some people have like advertised to do exploratory therapy, and I know that it does work, because what that actually looks at is the whole issues, the things that I used to retcon as dysphoria. So I used to love to dance and sing. I was very typical. I wanted, you know, I say typical, I was very, very stereotypical, flamboyant, but I knew I shouldn't have been. And all these things got retconned to be dysphoria, you know, in the background. It was like, oh, the reason I was like that was because I was actually a girl. But in terms of the exploratory therapy, I think that would be a better way forward. And I am seeing it seep in, but we are lucky in the sense that the UK doesn't have any strict conversion therapy laws yet, but in the US you're not allowed to do that full stop. So I think we've got a good chance here, and I do think exploratory therapy does, from what I've heard from a lot of people, seems to be the best type of therapy for this, for gender dysphoria.
Yeah, I'd echo what Ritchie said. I mean, look, there's a severe lack of data in this field and long-term studies, but research does show correlations with some of the things that you touched upon, like previous trauma, abuse, internalized homophobia. We know that there's a correlation with autism. We know that there's a correlation with sexuality as well. So we really do need to start capturing this data. And for me, so often it seems to be symptomatic of a wider disease that particularly a young person might have in themselves. I mean, it's not easy being a young person going through adolescence. We all know that, I'm sure. And when I used to speak to children at Childline, I would kind of engage in a bit of a thought experiment, because they would often say, well, I want to transition. And I would say, okay, let's imagine a few years down the line, you've had the medication, you've had the surgery, you've transitioned. Are you happy? And almost always they would come back to me with a handful of other things that they still hated about themselves. And that began to get them to realize that this wasn't the issue in and of itself. It was just symptomatic of wider unease in the world. And I think that's where we need to focus on. And because, as we say, it's completely natural, you touched upon this earlier, people going through puberty to not like what's happening to them, to not even like the way that their bodies are changing, because it's new, it's uncomfortable, it's uncertain. And the message should be, you're going to be okay at the end of it, and not, you can pause your puberty if you want to.
Yeah.
Any other questions? There's a lady just there, back in the middle with her hand up. Yes.
Oh, who's got that?
Thank you.
I'll come to you afterwards. Yes, please. Carry
on. Firstly, thank you both for a really interesting and heartbreaking conversation. Particularly thank you to you, Ritchie.
Thank you.
I think I would speak for everybody to say there's two words that get used around trans people online endlessly, of stunning and brave, and it's totally undeserved most of the time. But listening to you, I think your bravery is breathtaking. So thank you. My question is, you were talking earlier about, and you were reflecting about how you were years ago when you were in this cult, essentially. It's not a word that's come up, but that's essentially what we're talking about, is people in the cult. And if you'd had a conversation with James, how he couldn't have got through to you, or you'd have dismissed everything he said. I wondered if you had any reflections on now, if there is anything that could have been said, because I find myself having conversations with people who are either supporting this or are caught up in it. And you want to do something. You don't just want to have a row and make people feel bad, but what could we say that is effective from your perspective looking back? I'd be interested if you had any thoughts at all. And obviously that might have only been true for you. It might not be universally true for everybody who's there, but I wondered if you had any thoughts.
That's a great question, thank you. I feel that what we need to do is, when you're having these discussions, there's a lot of intellectualization about the subject matter, and you can get lost in that, especially when there's a language war going on, right? But instead, I tend to focus on the core emotions and feelings. Is this person speaking out of anger? Are they speaking out of grief? Are they happy? You know what I mean? And I think you can always reduce a lot of the conversations to how people are feeling within themselves. So I don't think it's helpful to come at anyone with like a one-liner or, you know, what do you think about this? Because that immediately puts them on the back foot and you're viewed as an oppressor. But instead, if you come at them with like that humanistic approach of, you're a human, I'm a human, what's going on? What's the feeling behind that? So if they say something to you, and even if you know what the answer is, even if you know it's like a load of whatever, I'm trying very hard not to swear.
I'll allow it.
And if you'll get lost in the intellectualization, so just always go back to the core emotion of what people feel, and is it fear? But you're not going to win this with good arguments, because you have to understand that a lot of there are some very intelligent people who get roped into this, like extremely, and it's not about that, it's about the emotions, because you can intellectualize your way out of very, very core but raw feelings, and you can attach all these mazes and route ways to how you came to that situation. But the bottom line is, people have fear, people have grief, people have loss and all sorts of stuff. And I think we need to focus on the basic issues, not making it a big, yeah.
Do we have time for one more? One more. There was just yes, that woman in the middle there.
That woman.
Thank you. First, thanks to the LGBT Alliance for the conference and to the panel. It's been most interesting. I come from Spain for this and Filia next weekend. In Spain, we're having the same problem because the government is pushing very hard for self-ID, and also they want to try to do that ban on so-called conversion therapy. And I didn't expect to talk here, but the thing is that you're all talking about gender dysphoria and distress, and this is a psychological condition and all that, which I agree. But then they have made a trick. In the World Health Organization, at the International Classification of Diseases, they have changed the section. Gender dysphoria was at the mental health section. Now it is at the sexual health section. That's how they can make the claim that psychotherapy is conversion therapy, because you're trying to treat someone who doesn't have a mental condition. They are piggybacking on the gay movement when they depathologize the homosexuality. But depathologizing homosexuality is true because it was removed from the ICD completely. So dysphoria has been renamed. Now it is discordance for incongruence, it's inches. And because it is still at the ICD, governments and private insurance companies, they can fund all the treatments. Had it been really, really depathologized, all treatments would be voluntary, like cosmetic surgery. So they have kept the whole thing inside the ICD in order for the governments to pay the bill, but at the same time to prevent people like you, here I have in front Dr. As. So they're trying to criminalize psychotherapists. So this is a very big issue. So I don't know, this is maybe a different route from the conversation, but it's criminal, as you said, because they're trying to prevent with everything that they can that people like Ritchie get help. So this is a political issue, and we have to be very aware of the language that is being used and the tactics that have been used. And there are people in high places, like in the UN, there's this independent expert on so-called sexual orientation and gender identity, and he started those reports about conversion therapy that happened maybe in Africa for gay people, and from that, they want to ban psychotherapy here in Western cultures where conversion therapy does not exist. So I wanted to say that, but also how from there, sorry. So, but it was a question, how to really get back to helping people if you're legally prevented to do
we
that.
need to tackle.
Yeah, Ritchie, just a very brief final comment on that.
Yeah, I'm just going to say we need to tackle these organisations, and are they still the leading experts for expertise for this? I don't think so. I think maybe it's time that rather than tackling the root cause of, say, the World Health Organization, we look at the people who prescribe to it and say, why are you prescribing to this? And see if we can offer them an alternative. Because if we play by their rules, we're not going to win. You need to make your own game.
I'm sorry that we couldn't take more questions. Apologies for that. Ritchie, I just want to finish off by saying I'm not going to chuck a cliche at you, but what I want to say is that given what you've been through, the way in which you are speaking out, and actually more than anything, the way in which you articulate yourself and the way in which you carry yourself, I just want to say that me personally, you have my utmost respect, and I think you're a role model to many of us out there. Thank you.
Ah.